Thank you so much for this interesting introduction. So I love being here. It's so interesting to see so many exciting people from all around the world, and we heard so many interesting perspectives today. What I want to talk about today is something striving, which is driving me both as an educator, as a professor, as a scientist, but especially as a game designer and gamer, because I think we all know this moment when we are stuck at some point, when we are looking for new inspiration, for new motivation eventually. And especially those are the moments when I try to find out what could I do to get this motivation, to this drive back. And not only as a game designer or a professor, I do have those moments, but also as a gamer. And I found out that this is my cat playing Diablo, obviously. I'm just watching, I'm player number 2. But in this moment, I realized like I tended to always play the same games. I play games since I'm a child. And I always loved games like Fable and Gothic and maybe GTA, Diablo. But if you look at all those games, also Witcher nowadays, all of them all of these games share similar features. Where it's mostly blockbuster games I used to play, AAA games, always sort of the same genre, a lot of role-playing games in that case, which are sharing similar experiences. And it's so important if we are driving and looking for new inspiration to get out of comfort zones. I think we all know that learning comes from pushing ourselves out of a comfort zone and trying to learn something new by failing, by fighting maybe things we're scared to do, but again, eventually find new inspiration outside something what we are usually doing anyways. And this is something when I was playing, for instance, my video games, I thought, okay, as a game designer as well, I do want to get to know way more games, but I love playing those particular games most of the time. So what should I do? So I thought for myself, I as a person, usually, where would I get my inspiration from? And personally, also if I look back, I think I've grown most of the time when I was traveling, when I would meet people from all around the world, when I would meet people with so many different backgrounds and stories. Those were the people who made me grow, learn what is going on in the world, what is going right, what is going wrong, and how, from the scientific perspective, what could I do to actually help make research which could help in those cases. And especially also when I'm traveling, there are so many interesting experiences I can make, so many beautiful landscapes I can look at. And if you look at travel guides, you always get recommendations. Here are really lovely recipes and things you can try when you're traveling. There are whole books where you can travel basically through cooking around the world. You can read so many books written in the different countries. So I thought, how about I challenge myself by traveling in a digital way? So I created a way where I thought games are something which are so important to me. Having those personal experiences, having digital experiences. What if I travel through video games? So the challenge I set myself was called A Year of Playing the World. This was about 10 years ago. This did not age that well. So it's a lot of games. It's like almost 200 countries. So I tried to set myself the challenge. I want to find and play games from every country in the world. And this was something which did help me in so many different ways. Because first of all, I found an entirely different challenge. How would I find those games? And I would ask you now, if you think for yourself, if I would ask you the question, if I want to play one game which was developed in the country you live or you come from, which game should I play? This was the question I was asking. Do you know this from your countries? Most people don't. Interesting, isn't it? If I would ask you, for instance, think of your favorite games. what are the countries those games have been developed in, of your favorite game, a game you might have spent hours, dozens of hours, hundreds of hours. Do you know where your games come from? Do you know actually who developed those games? Interesting. Often we don't. I also myself, I was very, very confused at this moment when I realized that the people I would ask, and also myself, I know so little about the games I'm playing. We know a lot about the books. We know where the authors are coming from, who are the authors. We know often about the directors in movies, but sometimes we know so little about the games. This was already the first interesting thing I found. The second thing, when I then reached out further, a little bit deeper, so I thought, okay, if the general gamers don't know this information, who could I ask? So I reached out to developer communities. So in Austria, we have, for instance, lovely communities trying to bring together game developers in Austria, and pretty much every country has a community like these, or events for game developers where you then develop a game within a night or two, just to bring together people. So I reached out to the different communities all around the world. And one thing which was really, really, really wonderful, I met so many interesting people, some of them also then in real life, who were putting forward the game development communities in their respective countries. And the nicest thing I found was the stories they told me about the development. If you, for instance, start Googling for games for countries like Pakistan, or if you look for games developed or games with references to Iraq or Iran, often you will not find the games developed in those countries, but rather news headlines, often negative headlines about games being set in those countries. So this is not what I was aiming for. So when I reached out to the people, they told me so many interesting stories about the games being developed and how they were developed. On the top right, for instance, you see me playing the game from Peru, in Peru, at Machu Picchu. And when I talked to the people there, they already told me everything about the development history of game development in Peru. So this all started, for instance, with games being back then only translated in a few languages. And in order to make it translated to their people, a couple of Peruvian hackers came together and starting hacking, modding the games basically to add their language to the games so that their people can play the games as well, to make it accessible to everyone. And by doing so, they sort of also added eventually another level, another game element, and all of a sudden were game developers themselves. So this is sort of how game development started, for instance, in Peru. And this was so interesting to learn about those histories and those stories about the communities. When we now look a little bit closer into the games I found, you see also, is it the typical blockbuster AAA games you know from the lists? Interestingly, it's not. So when I had started asking people about this one game they should recommend from the countries, especially also people from the developer communities, it was often games which were really outstanding in representing the country, representing very strong characters, telling very personal stories, telling stories from the country. And for this talk, I brought 3 major findings I had during this project, which then also shaped the way I do my research on learning environments. Because games can be such a fantastic source to identify new ways for motivating people to do also things which are outside of entertainment, such as education. And you'll be surprised how many interesting game elements can be found within games, especially in the games I found, which then can inspire new ways of teaching, new ways of therapy, and so on. So the 3 main findings I had, that the games that stuck out and which were recommended by the people were often games with a strong cultural or historical setting, and letting me, again, like I mentioned before, travel into this country or travel back in time to have experiences. We call it immersion, immerse ourselves in experiences which might not be possible otherwise. The second one was games as window into other perspectives. I think we hear it quite often. That's something which we really need to learn these days, is also understanding different perspectives, empathy. And games are a window doing so, because I can take the role of someone else through a video game. In a movie, I will be always this person sitting in front of the TV and watching a documentary and say, wow, this is a sad experience, or this is an interesting experience. However, if in a game, I am the person of the documentary. And third, there are so many interesting elements, especially in indie games, which is like the opposite of those AAA world, where games can innovate, whether it's through game mechanics or through tech. So let's look at some examples. So when I asked people from Sweden is really known for a fantastic AAA industry. So many probably of your favorite titles are coming from Sweden. However, the game which was recommended is called A Year Walk. A Year Walk is a lovely indie game, probably a 1 or 2 hour experience, which tells you about the folklore of Sweden. In these images, we see a couple of screenshots. And what you see, for instance, in the middle, those are the mylings, which is a small little concept of this folklore, which I'm being taught also in form of this dictionary. And through this game, I learn what this year walk experience is all about. So I'm not giving away spoilers now. I really recommend playing this, but I learned so much about this cultural aspect by playing this game. The second game, which is on the slide, is this War of Mine. Poland is also known for so many AAA experiences. However, the game which was recommended is called This War of Mine, a war game. However, you're not the typical war hero. You see the other side of the war. You're a civilian and you just try to survive. And the game is all about making very difficult decisions. This is a superpower of video games, this game mechanic that you are forced to make decisions yourself, which again makes you learn and makes you think. This is also a mechanic which we then reused for a lot of educational games, where we want to make people think about the daily decisions they're making. The second would be this idea that you take to see the world through other eyes. And one game which I really love to talk about is called Path Out. Path Out is actually an Austrian production, but it tells the story of a Syrian refugee who came 2014 to Austria, Abdullah. And he shared his story not through a movie, not through a book, but they created a video game where you are Abdullah and you experience what it means to escape civil war from Syria and try to come to Austria. And this is so powerful to learn about those other perspectives. And the third example would be the element of innovation. Most surprised I was when I learned that the game of France, also a country which also a lot of Ubisoft productions are coming from, are not the big blockbusters we usually know from the top 10 lists, but it was a game called Alone in the Dark, very old one from 1992, but it was stuck to the people's and especially the developers' head in France because it was so known for the innovation. This game was the first survival horror game and was so important for many other games in this genre. And it also innovated in terms of graphics. So what you see in those slides, those cinematic, atmospheric, polygonal characters, this was super innovative back then, also from a technological point of view. So you will find so much innovation in video games, in video game mechanics, which we then can reuse for so many other interesting aspects. So for instance, letting people experience other point of views through virtual reality technologies, for instance, and use game mechanics to have them make decisions, to interact and to learn. But what I also found, and this is very unfortunate, is that we don't treat our games really well. So what I also found was that games are still not seen as cultural or artistic goods which are supposed to be preserved and archived. So many of the games I wanted to play and I got recommended, I was not able to find or play anymore. And this is something which I find such a pity, because if we look at games with those cultural stories, backgrounds, the artistic aspects, whether it's the music or the 2D, 3D art and the coming together, are artistic and cultural goods. And we would need to also make sure that they are included, like art, like books, into our museums, be archived, be conserved. So if I want to summarize, I just want to encourage you, like I said in the beginning, no matter what you're doing, just step outside of your comfort zone, like I did through my gaming experience, which then really enriched not only my gaming world, but actually my whole research. Play eventually games or things you do, a little bit more awareness. Look who were the people behind it. Why were those things being developed or written or created? And also, don't rely on the first search results on Google or nowadays ChatGPT. Try to do research a little bit deeper. Talk to the people. This is where the most interesting experiences come from. And then, if I may say so, I think there's so much potential in all your fields in video games and in so many interesting, diverse range of video games we are having these days. So with that, thank you so much, and I hope you find some interesting games to play in this list.